Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, yWhales, wherever in the world you are today. So it is October 26th. Bitcoin has finally kind of pierced that $20,000, kind of glass ceiling it's been bouncing around on for the last few weeks. I will say overall, we're heading into midterms, and so blockchain overall is not a massive, sexy asset class today. I think Web3 is currently sitting in a bear. I am absolutely going to say it's not a winter. There's way too much innovation. There's way too much interest. But that being said, I always say, during the bull, like everyone has to have a very different focus on how do you capture, financially and kind of energy wise, the momentum in a bull. In a bear, we all get to kind of take a step back and really say, what did we learn during the last cycle? Where is the innovation heading, and how can we provide utility as well as kind of usability of everything that we've seen so far to date? My guest today is, and I'm super excited for this one. This is a good geek out moment here. Keir Finlow-Bates, generally referred to as Blockchain Gandalf, as I've heard in a few circles as well. But Keir, I can't possibly introduce you as well as you can introduce yourself. So if you wouldn't mind just taking it away.
Hi. Well, first, thanks very much, Jay, for having me on this podcast. Very much appreciated. I'm Keir Finlow-Bates. I live in Finland, but I'm English, as you can probably tell from my accent. And I've been working full-time in blockchain for 7 years and looking at it starting in 2010. I think that's the first year that I actually looked at it. It's either 2010 or possibly early 2011. I haven't got an exact record. But it's been my passion for at least a decade.
Yeah, it's really hard because my first Bitcoin purchase, I was able to figure it out, and finally it was early 2010. I bought 100 of them for $20, and just because I was curious about the technology. But if you remember way back when, you were probably there with me. They were really talking about this is a test of what a theoretical digital currency would look like. They never said Bitcoin to the moon or hold on to these things forever. It's we're deploying this. We threw away the keys. Play around with it, but something in the future is going to come.
Well, for starters, I have to say you were one step ahead of me in actually buying some that early on, because I made the classic techie mistake, which is I was absolutely fascinated with the technology, and I downloaded the code and read it and ran it on my computer, turned off the miner because it came with its own miner built in it in 2010, and I turned it off after about half an hour once I'd understood what it was doing. And then I think I grabbed my first Bitcoin from Gavin Andresen's faucet. And at that time, he'd been giving away 5 Bitcoin to anybody for free back then. Because as you said, it was considered a sort of a test. I don't think at that point people were even convinced that was going to be the final thing, that there might be another release or version coming out rather than everything being built on it. Yeah. So I didn't actually buy my first Bitcoin in 2013, which is why I'm still working. I mean, I've done okay out of it, but I don't get to kick back on a remote island and drink Mai Tais.
Don't worry, I threw all mine away.
Okay.
Because when you have to upgrade your computer, there's certain things that you move. And remember, like, I know everyone thinks like, cloud storage and everything's free. Like you really had to think about what you want to transfer from the old crappy computers to the new computers. And the way I always put it, because people are like, oh my God, I can't believe you threw it away. I said, I want you to go find your Tamagotchi. Your Tamagotchi is now worth $10 million. Where is it? And the reality is that if you don't care about it back then, we had no idea where these things were going to go. Yeah. And so, your true history is you're a mathematician. Is that correct?
That's right. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a chemist. And then when we actually did chemistry classes, I discovered that I am absolutely appalling at practical experiments. I could never get a titration within 3 cubic centimeters of what it's supposed to be. You pour 2 chemicals into a jar and they're meant to turn blue, and mine would be the only one that turned green. And so I moved on to thinking, well, maybe maths would be a better thing to focus on. And then I went to university and studied maths, did a PhD, and was a maths lecturer initially. My I think the first paid job I had that wasn't a summer holiday, work in a factory kind of thing, was as a mathematician. So I guess, yes, I started as
That's
a
fabulous.
mathematician.
So when you look at and did you ever have any prior financial traditional financial training as well, or was it pure from a mathematical standpoint?
I had absolutely no knowledge of economics. And I mean, you know, I kind of thought of it, I think, as arithmetic, maybe a
Yeah.
bit of multiplication. Why do they make such a big deal about it? That has been the greatest learning from Bitcoin and from blockchain, is that I was in my early 40s when I first saw it. You get to that age, you think, yeah, I know pretty much most things. I've got a pretty good view of the world. I've read some philosophy. And then I had to go look at economics. And I suddenly realized I didn't have a clue how money worked. I had no idea where it came from. I had the understanding of money that a 6-year-old has, that my 6-year-olds have. It's the stuff that you have in your wallet or in your bank account, and you go out and you buy things with it. And that's how they see it. And of course, they don't ask, well, where does this come from? And how is it made? Because that's a really quite a sophisticated question. And it turns out the answer is really, really complicated too. And I have to admit, I don't fully understand the interaction between government, central banks, retail banks, investment banks, how all these things fully connect together. I've got a bit of an understanding, so I can kind of explain it to somebody who has no economics knowledge. But anybody who's looked at this in detail will realize I'm still patchy there.
So with that perspective, and I'm really excited to hear this, do you recall kind of your initial theses, your own perspective on when you read the white paper by Satoshi, whoever Satoshi is?
Yeah, the first thing about the paper is it's remarkably short. I mean, you look at it and you think, this is 8 pages, right? Then you discover that actually there are layers upon layers underneath it. And it is incredibly, the individual sentences look fine, but it's incredibly densely packed with meaning. And Satoshi must have spent an awfully long time thinking about this. It's like the equivalent of Einstein's relativity paper, which was only 4 pages long, by the way.
Yeah.
In the succinctness of it, and then the impact that it suddenly has when you start to think about what the implications of what's being talked about are. So I first looked at it in that kind of cliche way of the 5 blindfolded people presented with an elephant, and they all grab hold of a bit, and it's like it's a snake, it's a tree trunk, it's a piece of rope. So I initially thought the consensus system stuff was really interesting, and actually, to be fair, that's the key computer science element of it. Nakamoto
Yeah.
solved a consensus problem that's been an open problem in computing. And unfortunately, although it is a practical solution, it's not actually that useful in theoretical computer science, because it relies on the incentivization of the parties in the system. And so it moves into economics in that sense. And I think computer scientists would kind of hope for a purely theoretical solution rather than one that relies on psychology. But it is what it is. And it is a great breakthrough.
Yeah, and from the consensus standpoint, again, we have a lot of users and listeners that understand very well. I would love to hear just how you explain what's occurring with Bitcoin's proof of work from a mathematical standpoint, because your perception is very unique.
Well, it's a lottery. It's about probability. So by getting your computer to run the software and perform these, they describe them for some reason as complex mathematical puzzles that need to be solved. They're not complex. They are not puzzles. It literally is a grind. It's just, here's an algorithm, turn the handle, get the answer out. Is it the answer you wanted? No, try again. Which is very much like buying a lottery ticket. Buy the ticket. Did the numbers come up? No, throw it away, buy another one. Except that you are buying, well, initially it was millions of lottery tickets. And as more people joined and threw more resources at it, you're having to buy billions of lottery tickets to stand a chance of winning. And so it's completely probabilistic, and somebody could find a solution on their first try, just as you could buy one ticket in your life and win the Powerball or whatever it's called in the States, or you could be buying tickets by the truckload every single day and never win. It's down to chance. Yep. Now, the odds are that if you play a lot, you're going to win, fairly regularly. And if you don't play at all, you're guaranteed not to win. And if you play just once, then you might be lucky, but probably not. So all these miners are doing the digital equivalent of buying lottery tickets every second, billions of them. And one of them gets the winning ticket that says you're allowed to make the next block, which they then do. And they do this because when they submit it, they also get to put in a transaction that grants them Bitcoin. Used to be 50, then it went to 25 after 4 years, then 12.5. Now it's at 6.25, so it keeps going down. But the price of it on the whole keeps going up, and that kind of compensates. And that's what keeps the miners incentivized to buy these tickets.
Yeah, and one of the things I find so interesting, and we'll move off Bitcoin here in a second, but the core concept of the halvings and that kind of future proofing of where this could go if just let run indefinitely over the course of time, that miners today are the primary drivers of the market. So if the price is up and high, they need to sell less. If the price is low, they're dumping because they've got electric costs. And right now there's kind of that triarchy of just horrible, chaos in that industry because you have high energy prices, low Bitcoin, and kind of a cooled economic climate. So it's one of the reasons why Bitcoin is not rallying on some days. From your perception, though, as we've seen now the advancement from just Bitcoin and Bitcoin forks to kind of the Ethereum when it was on proof of work as well. What did you see when you saw kind of that Bitcoin and now this theoretical like internet computer of Ethereum come online?
Well, to be honest, when I first saw it, I didn't get it. I thought, okay, so I can put these computer programs on, I can put the source code actually to them, or the bytecode for them, on a blockchain, and then other people are going to run this code and all try to get the same answer. And if they do, then great. And if they don't, there's a problem. And so it's kind of, and I looked at that and thought, well, I've got Bitcoin here. I can just write software that interfaces with Bitcoin and that sends transactions that I want. And I can write complex code and I can fix it. Why do I want to use a system where instead of me writing computer programs to detect transactions, respond to transactions, why do I want to put that on a blockchain? And so I really only started looking at it in about 2016, I think, with Ethereum, and then really switched most of my efforts from Bitcoin to Ethereum around about 2017, 2018. And so
was that with the advent of ECR20? Was that when that came in?
Around about that time, yeah. I think maybe it may well have been that ERC20 actually had turned on the light bulb for me, actually explained what was going on here. Because before all these standards, you kind of had to invent everything yourself and patch it all together yourself, and Vitalik Buterin wrote about it in the white paper, or was it a yellow paper? I can't remember the color, but he had a whole section on what it could be used for, and he was saying, sort of automating trades, exchanging. He described a whole bunch of the applications implementing tokens. So he talked about a whole bunch of the things that we now kind of take for granted, but back then he had the vision. And people like me, unfortunately, didn't. And it was only when individual people started putting together these templates, saying, here's how you can deploy a fungible token, here's how you can deploy a non-fungible token, it started clicking. And especially the Lego-like aspect of it, that all this stuff is deterministic. So as long as you can assess the code, that's its one Achilles heel. Then you can say, yeah, I know under what circumstances this fungible token contract can mint in a way that I don't know about the central banks and the governments of a nation. And then here's another one that allows you to swap tokens. I know how that functions, so I can make predictions as to what will happen when people interact with it. The people are unpredictable, but the way the system responds to what those people do is entirely deterministic. And that's what you want. You don't want it not being, you want it to be able to make up its mind and say, yes, you have transferred this, or yes, you have converted this into that. So it's clever.
It really is, and I agree with you. I kind of lost interest in Bitcoin during its Silk Road era, is the way I refer to it. The primary currency of illicit substances around the darknet, and I remember being like, yeah, good thing I got rid of that. I don't need this anymore. And the reality is, had I held on to them till $20 a piece, I probably would have sold them then anyway. But now you've now entered this ECR20 world where standards, and I'm a huge proponent of standards. Shockingly, I do believe in common sense regulation. I think a lot of regulation goes too far, but I think that you do have to have standards and regulations for consumers to understand what is the playing field, what are the rules of the game, and then from there, we want to take advantage of those rules. And I think that blockchain does a really good example, or not example, a really good job in a lot of cases of helping to set some rules and set some standards. But they don't always work is the problem. And sometimes they don't scale. So, kind of before we get into the modern era of blockchain, which is today. So, kind of that 16, 17, 18 era with the ICO craze, what was the feelings that you were having back then watching just everyone and their friends, deploy a coin, deploy this, deploy, just deploying things on chain just to deploy. What were you seeing that this was the future, or did you feel that was just a bunch of people testing a new technology?
I looked at it, and actually at the time, my business manager was saying, shouldn't we be doing an ICO for our product? And I said at the time, absolutely not. Because I'd been reading about the history of the SEC in the US, right? Now, I know a lot of people in blockchain are kind of boo to the SEC coming in and spoiling our party. And I do think that the SEC has a bit of an image problem and a bit of an overreach problem at the moment. But the principles that they were set up for make perfect sense. You'd had the Great Depression following the stock market crash. You had a whole bunch of people taking advantages of loopholes. I think Joe Kennedy, the father of JFK, made a fortune through insider trading because that was legal. Well, not legal, that was not illegal at that time. And Roosevelt signed the 2 acts for the SEC in 33 and 34, I think, to protect people against unscrupulous behavior by entrepreneurs and speculators in the stock market space who understood the system better and knew how to manipulate it to their advantage and the disadvantage of all the ordinary investors around them. So in that sense, it's a good thing. And when you look at what was going on in a lot of the ICOs, they were securities. They were doing exactly the kind of stuff that was going on in the 20s that we now say that's not acceptable. You have to publish full information. You have to register. The people who are doing this need to be known so they can be found and prosecuted if they're committing a fraud. So these things all make sense. But I think the issue I have with the way that the regulation, particularly in the US, is going is that the 2 things. They're approaching it as though it's just like all the other securities. And it's not. It's something new. It has security-like properties, but it has a whole bunch of other properties. And So, and the second thing is that they've kind of got a hammer, and therefore they see everything as a nail. So when you've got the Securities Act of 1933, then everything looks like a security to you. That's their purpose. So, and I wish I'd seen more from the Commission's side, so the commodities side.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. And so I remember that era, pretty well. And it was every day, here's the 3 dozen new coins that have launched and the 3 dozen projects that,
Yeah.
have a,
And you get
kind
jealous,
of a
don't
fly
you?
by night. Yeah, well, you would watch and you go, I just like, okay. And again, remember the wallet situation was not what it is
Hmm.
today. There was a lot of issues with holding these and where do you get them, and DeFi didn't exist. So you were kind of buying on these really sketchy websites and,
Mm.
and all sorts of things. Because the on and off ramps weren't what they are today. So, but one of the things, and I love that the concept in the talk about the SEC and kind of, there's a lot of 3-letter agencies around the United States. And I talk quite
Mm.
often about, I just wish that we had some common sense regulation around,
Hmm.
blockchain technology that was at least on par with what we did with Web 1. Web 1 was allowed to run rampant for a very large amount of
Hmm.
time to really have it, let it find its foothold, let it figure out where things are, and they started layering in and go, hey, Digital Music Copyright Act, that those types of things started to kind of roll in to protect some IP and some intellectual property that was suddenly like, hey, this stuff can be
Hmm.
sent globally in seconds, and it's a lot easier to do now. But blockchain's not being given, in my opinion, that same credence. We're taxed, more heavily than most other asset classes. And I will say that a little bit of this cat and mouse game that we have going on with regulators, as well as kind of some of the good degens that want to stay anonymous and really test the technology. It's short term gains, and I think it's also short term kind of hurts a little bit of our credibility. But long term, I hope that we can find the right people to put in the right seats that understand there's immense amount of value for humanity
Mm.
with blockchain. I mean, to me, it is the largest game changer since Internet One.
Oh, I agree with pretty much everything you say there. The I do think Web 1 didn't have the issue that blockchain does because it didn't have the sheer quantity of cash involved. That
Mm-hmm.
when it first came along, it it was dealing with things like sharing academic papers, newspaper articles, pictures of your cat, those kind of things. Um,
Dancing
Indeed, once it
babies.
start, yeah, once it started encroaching, and we were sharing music files from rock bands and videos, and using it for gambling and things like that, then you could see why the government came in. But I guess blockchain moved so quickly. So the when you think about it, it's shocking that you can go from something that doesn't exist to being worth a trillion in the space of a decade. I don't think you see
Yeah,
that very often.
and $1 trillion, again, it's we can actually see, go on chain and you check the
Hmm.
oracles and you can verify that's the amount of dollars in. With Web
Hmm.
1, we have no idea what IP was
Yeah.
locked up. We have no idea how many dollars were transacted. There was nobody reporting these things. Credit card companies, um, I
Mm.
don't know, we don't
Yeah.
know the difference between this. And we also saw with Amazon, as well as any other online retailer, they were given a pass on traditional state and federal taxes. Like you could
Right.
save 7 to 10% by buying online, to help that asset grow. And
Right.
I constantly say this, that when you convert from Bitcoin to wrapped Bitcoin, that's a taxable event. You can't even use a 1031 like kind exchange. We're going from one property to another. So certain things on the books that I think would apply,
Hmm.
are being bypassed. But from your perception, regulation, only gets us so far. We need innovation,
Hmm.
and you have multiple patents, multiple innovations that you have done in the space. Would you mind talking about some of your kind of more exciting ones?
Well, I'm not sure the word exciting really applies to them. I
We're
started.
we're but we're Web3 geeks, man. This is
Okay,
great for
right.
us.
Yeah. Well, most of my IP is actually based at the sort of fundamental level. So I was looking at consensus systems. So I got a patent for improving the mechanism for selecting validators, for example. So uh, I haven't really followed up. I should have a look at see what how exactly the Ethereum staking system works, because who knows, maybe they've infringed. Um, and I did a whole bunch on supply chain, and I was particularly interested in how can you map real physical objects to digital objects? And the answer is it's really, really hard. We've faced this in other industries. This is why DRM hasn't really worked for music. The music and movie industries have been saved by streaming. It's
Yep.
People would still be pirating in vast quantities, and those industries would be suffering if streaming hadn't come along, because we all stream because it's a lot less effort than going to some weird torrent site and hoping that you can get a decent copy that doesn't have massive Korean subtitles on it of the movie you want to watch. So and yeah, so the supply chain one and linking physical assets to digital assets is a hard one. But I've got a few things to do with RFID tags and how they can interact with blockchain nicely.
Yeah, I will right off the bat agree with you. I think logistics companies are one of the key, kind of stand to gain the most from this. I dealt with international logistics for 20 plus years of my career. And, we had entire departments of people that did nothing but make phone calls to figure out where things are. Where is this? When's it coming? When's it going to get here? And blockchain, if adopted by an entire industry, could save vast amounts of money, time, resources, and I mean, across the board, it's a win.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a shipping manifest, for example, it's shocking that they look like an entire pack of photocopier paper. It looks like a whole ream paper, but one of the issues is when you've got one of these systems, it's they're built up over tens, in some cases hundreds of years, and there are all sorts of processes that have become baked into the system that's used. And it's quite possible that somebody 50 years ago made a decision that we now do this, and then everybody's been doing it, and at that point you knew why they made that decision. Now we just do it because it's the process, and consultants come along and say, well, we can remove that. That's got no point. Turns out if you take it away, the whole thing unravels. So there's an immense amount of knowledge in the legacy logistics systems. And I don't think it's a trivial problem to step in with blockchain and replace what's there. It brings a bunch of advantages, particularly on the sort of settlement side of things. And the avoiding the he said, she said debates that you get. I mean, that's actually where my patent came from. My first one in supply chain and blockchain was a courier claimed to have delivered a parcel to my house, but I never got it. And the parcel never turned up anywhere. And so eventually the seller sent me another one. But what can I do? If a courier says, I was there, I handed it over, and I'm saying, well, you didn't hand it over to me. And I don't know where the signature
and I think what you run
from.
into, yeah, but this is a standard problem, and I will agree with you. The concepts of a true open ledger, and I'm not a one chain to rule them all. I think there's a multi-chain universe coming through, but this concept, and I wrote an unreleased paper from years ago, which was centered around the fact that blockchain technology, it doesn't matter what chain it is the first time that these companies that have been running 1970s and 1980s infrastructure, old AS400s or, Oracle 8 systems still today in operation. This is the first time when they really should be looking at it's time to think about upgrading. We're not ready there, but this is the solution. I know companies, banks, billions of dollars on the books that are running Oracle 6 and 7. And there's no upgrade path to a more modern system. Because there are, exactly as you stated, there are these black boxes, meaning servers in the basements, with, at this point in time, there's dozens of battery backups and generators around these things. Because if they go down, not only does nobody know what's in there, no one knows how to boot them back up, because the people that wrote those languages, the COBOL coders and everything else, again, that was the way you did it back in the 80s and 90s. You just start from scratch, code something, and you have a team there to manage it. And so this is the first time that I think a lot of these big companies, when I say big companies, I'm saying multi-billion-dollar companies, can finally have a solution to slowly start porting out and understanding what these black boxes do.
It's kind of shocking when you think about it, isn't it? That you could indeed have a black box in a basement somewhere, and if that goes down, then you're done for. I know in Cambridge, I have a friend who was a computer officer for one of the colleges, and they had a problem with their internet, and they finally tracked it down to an old Spark server that had actually been plastered into the wall. They put a false wall in front of it when they were redoing a room, and nobody knew it was there. And when it went down, their access to the university network was gone, and it took them nearly a week, and then a hammer and a chisel to get it out to fix it. So, and that's just for a college, so students can have access. Thinking about billions of dollars moving around through it.
Yeah, no kidding. And and again, let's talk about, billions and trillions of dollars moving through it. The number one consumer today, right now, of 56K modems is companies related to our SWIFT system. A majority of the archaic infrastructure that connects the global financial data, in a lot of cases, is still using dial-up modems. And fiber exists. This is not new. But the problem is that the systems of which these databases live on is so old that there's no way to plug in an always on connection. It just knows dial up, send a packet of data, and then close down and do it again. And so I'm excited for what blockchain can do in a world to solve some of these issues, because if these things go down, like, it causes major issues around the world.
Yeah. People scrambling to find RS-232 connector cables and things like that. Yeah.
I got a box of those somewhere.
I think everybody who used computers in the 80s has. Yeah.
Yeah, because we were there, listen, that was even when we had Radio Shack, you could run number two. So Keir, when we kind of think about where blockchain is today, and I mean, we're dealing with multiple iterations, multiple bear and bull cycles, of which we've kind of gone up and down, and the latest craze of this last bull was NFTs. And to me, it was the exact same. It was watching the ICO craze all over again. Whoever had the best marketing, seems to have done the best. But as soon as the bull ended and the bear started, anything that didn't have real world utility, real world access, or kind of a traditional real world value, went to zero. The perception of it's rare because it's on blockchain. That evaporated real quick.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that there are still surprisingly large communities of very enthusiastic supporters of particular projects, and I think they seem to have survived. And what this has done is wiped out the quick speculators who thought, I'll just copy that, flip the JPEG, and release another 10,000, and I'll sell them. And because these ones are selling for 50 ETH, mine will sell for 5, and I can retire comfortably off the profits. And so it's really good to see it wipe that out, because I found that intensely irritating. My Twitter feed was just completely jam-packed with yet another pointless profile picture project.
And the bull run was so ridiculous with some of these that right at the peak, I remember watching a Solana project on, I don't remember what the name of it was, but these guys were, beautiful website, massive Discord, Twitter and all this other stuff. And, you got the notification like, hey, here's the mints today. And this is the highlighted one. Let's take a look at it. The active Discord, here it comes, everything's going, and minting starts, and you see all the mints and everything else going, and then like 5 minutes into it, like the Discord goes down, the website disappears, everything like just whoop, like total rug pull and gone. And there was some people chatting in other channels, and I was watching this, and somebody goes, for the amount of energy and effort, couldn't they have just generated some stupid NFT and we all would have been happy? Like instead of giving us nothing. Like it was so like they've already done all the work. Spend the $100 on Fiverr and make some randomly generated garbage, and it wouldn't have been a rug pull, it just would have been a project like others.
Right. There was that one NFT project where everyone was very excited about what it was going to look like, and then it came out with a bunch of really bad Pokemon ripoff characters. I think this Kevin.
Crypto Zoo.
Yeah, and that was
Yeah,
just
the
funny.
oh no, don't worry. I still have my egg. I'm going to hold on to that one, and it reminds me like that it doesn't matter who's promoting it. If it doesn't
Uh-huh.
have real world utility, doesn't provide access to something,
Yeah.
then just ignore it. And even
Mm.
then, it was this thing had all the it should be fine, but whatever.
Yeah,
So
but utility's hard, right? That's the issue. It's very easy to just churn out 10,000 pictures and say, here they are. To actually make a system that uses those, that's tricky.
So, with you having kind of a really, I would say, better level of understanding than most of proof of stake, and
Mm.
really understanding how not just proof of work is, but proof of stake. What do you believe do you believe there's a limit on transaction speeds, TPS, for modern chains? I know Ethereum is still running relatively slow. They'll get
Mhm.
there with the next few iterations. Right now, I think Solana is kind of capping at around 40,000 TPS and some tests before it reboots itself, with the goal of about a 500,000 TPS. But do you believe that that's the metric that a lot of people should be watching? Is it needed?
Um, well, I think to start with, the transaction limit is a combination of how often the blocks are generated and how big they're allowed to be. And so it doesn't really matter if you've got a staking system or a proof of work system for that. It's actually at a lower level in the architecture of the system. So, uh, you know, that's where you had all the big Bitcoin fork wars, where some of them wanted to make the block size bigger so they could fit more transactions in, and others wanted to keep what they saw as the purity of the system. And that's the chain that is now the biggest, and you can have 7 transactions a second. So Ethereum is kind of limited by the amount of gas that you can spend on producing within a block. So, and that corresponds to how many activities you can undertake in a block, which are like transactions. Could also include deploying contracts, which I guess are not, well, they're not transactions in the usual sense of the word. Um, and that's why they're looking towards this idea of sharding, of having these multiple parallel blockchains. That's kind of, if you can only handle X transactions a second, but you can have 10 clones of your chain, now you've got 10x. Some of the other systems, yeah, they just pack more into the block size. It's not an area that I have spent an awful lot of time on. I do think that at the moment, Ethereum kind of wobbles along okay until there's a popular event, and then it goes down. But my bank seems to have the same with that it works really well, except for certain times of the month when lots of transactions are being processed, I guess.
Yep.
So I do my accounts a week before the end of the month, not at the end of the month, because it's invariably the time that the online login doesn't work. Um, so so I think, and there are a lot of solutions out there that are trying to fill the gap that they perceive. Um, you know, Binance Smart Chain and Polygon do it for Ethereum. Solana has it as a big selling point. Um, I think they're all facing ultimate doom because eventually Ethereum will evolve to cope with this many transactions, and then all these layer two chains are going to become irrelevant. So I hope they're making hay while the sun shines, because cloudy weather is going to be coming in soon. And I think this one may be easier than the one we've just had with the move to the proof of stake. So I don't think it's going to take as long.
No, I absolutely, from an investment thesis, I invest in layer zeros, layer ones.
Mm-hmm.
I hold no layer twos for that exact reason. I think that a lot of them are doing some amazing things. But when
Mm-hmm.
you're 100% relying on a layer one, that's a tough, that's really tough to say, because
Mm-hmm.
we've seen, and that history repeat itself time and time and time again, with innovators. Apple, absolutely. If there's an app that's good enough on their app store,
Mm-hmm.
it may be a core integration that they have on the next release. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the challenge you have is being in someone's ecosystem and not controlling it.
I mean, Amazon does the same. They actually create products that match the successful ones that small stores have, and then you're wiped
Yeah.
out. So,
So when you look at the current landscape, and let's take Ethereum, Solana, Polkadot, and there's some other really interesting ones out there. Like to me, I think that those are, if we just take those three there. So Ethereum, been around forever, just made its move over to proof of stake. Solana is, there's a whole, they don't do as many of the contracts, things like NFTs and tokens are all built in natively to the code, so you have a lot more to work with there. And then, Polkadot with its parachain model, where you can have lots of chains that interact with a single chain when you don't have to go back and forth. How do you rate those innovations? Do you feel like they're, kind of all the same, or are we seeing kind of the splintering of blockchain going off into different directions?
Yeah, well, I think there's certainly space for more than one chain or two, and particularly for certain, well, I would say niche areas, but some of these niches are pretty big. So I'm expecting at some point a viable GameFi chain should step to the fore. I haven't seen one that says, "Hey, we're the chain you want to be using if you're producing games," and I think that's partially because the games, the progress of games in blockchain has been disappointingly slow, and also it's focused too much on the cash side and not enough on the wow factor. Back to the blockchains you mentioned. So I've not really looked at Solana. There wasn't anything when I first saw it that said to me, this is one that I really want to devote time to, because I often spend a day or two looking at a new blockchain, getting a sense of, what are the things that make it interesting? Can I summarize in a sentence or two what this blockchain does that another chain doesn't do? Or is it even a complete con? Right? Because there's quite a few out there that
a lot of those.
Yeah. So, and there wasn't really anything that jumped out at me in Solana that said, this is one that you want to pay attention to. There was the transaction speed, but I've never really hit a major problem with transactions on Ethereum. There've been a few times where it's been overloaded, but I just sort of waited. And I guess maybe I'm patient because I receive payment from a number of clients in the US, so I'm used to it taking a week for the pay to get across sometimes. But it depends on the banking system, because some are very good, but some are, especially ones on the eastern seaboard, for some reason are really slow, which is funny because they're closer to Finland.
No, it has nothing to do with transaction speed. That's just the way they operate.
One of them sent me a check once, actually, about 4 years ago. I hadn't seen one in nearly 2 decades, but do they still use them in America? People still have checkbooks?
It's how I pay my ex-wife. I just want her to know that there's here's a physical piece of paper which you're going to have to go to the bank and deal with. I'm not going to make this easy.
Oh, my daughter laughed her head off when I explained. I got the check and I showed it to her and said, I've got a check. Can't even cash that in a Finnish bank. And she said, what is it? And I was saying, well, you have this book and you write an amount of money in and you sign it and then you can pay with it. And she just went, because as far as she was concerned, you're telling me you're just basically writing your own banknotes, right? And I'd have to explain, no, the bank then checks that you're allowed to do this and removes your balance. But her first take on it was just, I could just see in her eyes, she thought, he's just described forging money to me.
In some days it feels like that. I explained to her what a cashier's check is and how terrifying that is. Walk
down the street with $100,000 in your pocket. It's a bearer bond. Yeah.
Nothing I could be less interested in than a cashier's check. So Keir, when we're kind of looking at, where's things are heading, today and going down over the next few years. Clearly, speed, reliability, security are like top of mind, but there's an adoption, that we have to manage. I think that blockchain today is still really hard. I think it's really designed for a lot of hobbyists like us, because you really have to know and understand what's happening in the back end to make a transaction work. Someone goes on Amazon, plugs in their credit card, and it gives an error message. It's just an error. There's no big deal. Someone goes on to blockchain and interacts with a contract and there's an error. For all they know, their wallet was just emptied and all their content's gone. And, it can be horrible. Where's the evolution going in to help kind of facilitate some of these safety nets or safety features for blockchain?
Well, I think it's got to be usability foremost, and the problem we have is the examples we have from Web 2 are not particularly impressive. So Web 2's had this problem, and they have just bolted things onto it, and so now you're sitting there, you're trying to log in, you've got your password wrong, you need to reset it, and then you're getting text messages, you're having to call up authenticators that are on an old phone that you have in the back of a drawer. And um, I think the thing I would say is try buying something on your PlayStation for your kid. Right? This is something I go through every couple of months when a kid wants more V-Bucks, and it takes me typically 15 minutes to half an hour, and I'm going between my phone and my desktop and the games console, and
Yep.
it's just an absolute nightmare. And you're like trying to put passwords in with a controller on one. I mean, and I use long, secure passwords because I use a password manager on my machine, and then I set up the account on the game consoles company's website. So I have a 26 character password with question marks and hashes and funny characters in it, and then I'm supposed to enter this with a little kind of clickety click. And it turns out that it doesn't even have some of the characters that are in my password available on the little pop-up screen that I'm having to select from. So Web2 hasn't solved it, and they've just patched things on to try and fix problems, which is the way we do things, right? I mean, It's like a car engine. You look inside a car engine bay, it's, there's the engine, and then the other 90% is all the things we bolted onto it to fix the problems with the engine. So hopefully we could. Sorry, go ahead.
No, so that's a really good analogy, and I love the idea of Web 1 and 2 is very similar to repairing a car engine. If you take it out on the track, there's a problem with it. Come back in. We'll fix it. No big deal. And there's an entire system of you're going to buy the brand new car, and we're going to have to give you the warranty because we know how often it's going to break, and we need to see it.
Yeah.
In Web3, you're launching a satellite. You get to get it right, and at most you may be able to do some minor patching, but for the most part, you don't get to start over. Once it's been deployed, it's on chain and it's there forever. Are we really kind of prepared for that forever standpoint with blockchain on a lot of the things we do?
Well, we certainly have a problem at the moment, which is that Web2 companies come in and start doing this stuff. And a fair amount of my work over the last year has been dealing with these companies and trying to get them to understand. And you've got these young developers who've been working only in JavaScript, and they've become used to the fact that you can do over-the-air updates, that it's the website, you can fix it. Hey, you can even restart with the web server, and it seamlessly puts your new changes in. So. And then suddenly they're faced with the fact that they're supposed to write a smart contract that is going to be deployed and could be being used for the next 5-10 years. And what's worse, it could potentially have billions of dollars of value flowing through it. And of course, ultimately, the blame lies with the project admins who are hiring these developers to do these things, because they're trying to cut corners and cut cost. So that needs a big shift.
Yeah, one of the things I think that's really interesting is a number of people that are innovating in blockchain have no idea how some of these processes are in the real world. For example, I own multiple companies and I deal with payroll, both domestic and international. For domestic payroll, you have to start 5 business days early. For international payroll, you have to start 7 days early to move money through the proper channels. Now, to be clear, if I wanted to send some money to you, Keir, we could in 10 seconds flat, give me an Ethereum address, boom, boom, done. Solved. I could, if I need a service from you, I can pay you. We would be bypassing all legal channels, and I would be causing quite a number of issues around our country, and the Department of Labor would be very upset with me. So if I want to stay on the good side, I have to play by the rules. The challenge is that right now there's no happy median that exists to go from a 7-day process, 7 business day process, to a 7-second process. There's no way for me to span that gap. So either it's instant and we've bypassed all safeguards. If something's wrong with that wire, I can go, whoa, hold on, let's pull it back. There's safeguards and circuit breakers in place. Do you feel that speed is one thing, but how do we get to kind of reliability and trust in blockchain to kind of keep some of these institutions that do exist for good reason in the system?
Yeah, well, I think you're right that the people who initially started working on this thing have not been stuck in the middle of a large financial bureaucracy, and they just see the result of that bureaucracy. Delays, awkwardness, hard to find the right person to contact to get a complaint through. It just sort of churns along like a juggernaut. And indeed, when you're an individual, if I'm a contractor and I'm dealing with a small company, we don't want to use the kind of processes that a government finance department does in order to handle its finances, and nor should we have to. And most of the kind of employment law that countries have recognizes the fact that you don't require the same level of auditing, for example, for a hairdresser acting as a sole trader as you do for a multinational investment bank, which you would want to scrutinize quite thoroughly. And you're right that how do you bridge this gap? How do you move from a large cumbersome process that's there for a reason to span the range? And I don't think that we have all the solutions out there. Although it is funny how you're right, people are reinventing stuff, and they're actually reinventing and think they've come up with something new. And then people come in from conventional finance and say, well, yeah, we do that already in foreign exchange, or we do that already in futures trading. You've not come up with anything new. But yeah, it's given us a whole bunch of new tools. And with any luck, over time, it'll integrate itself into those systems and hopefully make them better. The fear is that it'll actually make them worse.
Well, and it's true. I mean, the problem is we've created these blockchains, and we say these blockchains are immutable. They cannot be changed. They're perfect by design. This is perfection. And then we attach bridges, of which it seems like somebody spent a weekend on, cobbled together some code, and before you know it, billions of dollars are now flowing through these things. With minimal safeguards, minimal oversight, and as soon as somebody understands, because you can again, the code's clear and transparent, you can see it all day long. As soon as somebody figures out a hack, they're going to take advantage of it because of the ability to be anonymous on chain. What's been your kind of perception of watching literally hack after hack after hack against these bridges?
My biggest complaint about it all is the way it's subverted the concept of bug bounties and white hat hackers. Right? It used to be very clear. You're a white hat hacker. You go to one of these sites where you tick on a box, terms and conditions, so that you can't be sued if you find a bug, and you promise to disclose it discreetly. And there's all sorts of stuff. And then you find a flaw in a system and you submit it. It gets assessed, and you get a $10,000 or a $20,000 reward. And that seemed like quite a nice, lucrative, side hustle for developers if you enjoy that kind of thing. And black hat hackers, of course, hack things and steal and damage, and then spend possibly the rest of their life on the run with the ill-gotten gains. We've now got a new kind of, I don't know what color hat hacker, where they start off as a black hat hacker, steal $100 million worth of assets, and then they say, tell you what, I'll give you 90% back if you promise me immunity. And in fact, label me a white hat hacker. And the companies are doing this. And of course, it makes financial sense, right? Do you look at that 100 million for the rest of your life thinking I can't get my hands on it? Or do you get 90 million back and you've lost 10? It's worth signing it. But it's like caving into kidnappers.
Yeah.
There's a reason
You
why
don't,
we have
you
this sort of.
never negotiate with terrorists.
Yeah, exactly. Except we always do, right? It always comes out that ultimately we always do. And the reason is that you look at the localized sort of balance of loss and gain it's the prisoner's dilemma. From a local perspective, it makes sense to do it. The impact on the global system, on the other hand, is catastrophic. And so that's been the worst impact as far as I'm concerned. But that's because I'm a test engineer by trade for like 20 years nearly before I went into blockchain. So the
Keir,
biggest thing,
when
of
you're
course, is
thinking
people
about,
losing their assets. That's
yeah,
tragic.
yeah, no, and that's one of the things we want to safeguard from. So, Keir, to kind of bring ourselves a little bit closer to a close right here, really looking forward. Let's just kind of theorize and let's go out 3 to 5 years. I know it's near impossible with the cycles we have and everything else. Where do you feel the next major innovation center is going to happen around blockchain? Clearly we went from a proof of work world to proof of stake. We've seen the kind of innovations around ERC 20, then to ERC 721, ERC 1155. I think each one of them has its positives and negatives, and kind of a lot of the tech around utility starting to trickle into the real world. What's our next phase of innovation?
It's a hard one. It's because the thing about innovation is it's not just that you have to have a great new idea. You have to convince everybody else that that idea is great and get them enthusiastic about it. And this is where inventors always fall down because they have this idea that if you build a better mousetrap, everyone will beat a path to your door. No, you could invent anti-gravity or invisibility paint, right? And unless you market it, no one's going to be interested. And it really is that terrible that the greatest inventions, if they're not sold well, and this is where the great inventors that we know of in history were also great showmen. Edison was a great businessman, and Tesla was a great showman, and that's why we remember them.
Yep.
So where it's going to go, I honestly, as I said earlier, I think the big next market is games. The current games companies are very much against it because they're incumbents. They like the current business model in the same way that the music industry didn't like MP3s because they were quite happy selling us ever improved plastic discs to play our music on. It was a great market for them. So, but the game companies are big. The gaming industry is, it's one of the biggest. I think it's bigger than movies and pop music combined. But
yeah, it's right there. I don't know if it's eclipsed it yet, but it's absolutely heading that direction. Mm-hmm. So, Keir, I have to say thank you so much for your time today. I'm absolutely just love hearing kind of the history of how you got into the space, and your perception on blockchain overall is very unique because you do come at it from a programmer level, but not from most of the people that I interact with. Like, here's my project, here's what I built, here's why I built it. This holistic kind of conversation around why does blockchain exist? What is it doing right? What is it doing wrong? And how is humanity interacting with blockchain? Was an amazing kind of conversation. As we kind of head out of here, are there any kind of final thoughts for just how people should perceive the Web3 blockchain space when they're just kind of thinking about entering it or innovating in it?
How you should perceive the Web3. I see a lot of discussion about what Web3 is, and people seem to have very strong opinions. We've moved on from is it Tim Berners-Lee view of the semantic web, or is it the blockchain view? It looks like Tim has lost that battle. So the media now reports on it as a blockchain phenomenon. And they make a big deal of it. The funny thing is that from a developer perspective, a Web3 website is just a website with some extra code that allows it to write stuff to a blockchain and read stuff from a blockchain in the same way that you write and read stuff from databases. So from a technical point of view, it's actually really not that different. The impact comes from the fact that it's a very different kind of database. This goes back to the early problems that technical people had with blockchain, which is they would look at it and say, yeah, but I can do that with a database much faster and much more efficiently and much more, easier. And it took me ages to come up with the answer to that. And the answer is, yeah, but you see, that's a technical solution. And what blockchain is solving is a social solution. It's solving a human problem rather. So it's a solution to a human problem, not a solution to a technical problem. And that is a problem of trust. How can people transact knowing that the transaction is going to go through? And so I think that's what it boils down to with Web3, is that we've got to get these analogies that explain not just what it's doing at the fundamental level, in the same way that you can look at cars, right? You've got a technical solution, but the thing is that cars change society. And that's the piece that I think is missing in people's minds with blockchain. They will shape society, and we have to understand and hopefully guide that.
Love it. Love it. yWhales, this is Keir. Again, we didn't really get to talk about you didn't have your Gandalf hat today, but I mean, truly one of the innovators in the space, been around in a long time. You've worked on, dozens and dozens and dozens of projects, which we didn't get into today, but I look forward to kind of having you contribute. We're excited to invite you onto our yWhales fireside. But for now, thank you so much, yWhales. We'll see you guys later, and Keir, we'll talk soon.